G'day, and welcome to Philosopher Rock, where these two blokes have got rock in their heads.
Welcome to Philosopher Rock. I'm your host GK, and in this episode, Brian and I are going to be discussing the band Shelter, who were a Krishnacore band, which in turn is a subgenre of hardcore punk. Now, if you know nothing about this, you're not on your Pat Malone, or you're not alone. This was all new to me before I discussed this with my co-host here, Brian. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that we haven't done an episode of Philosopher Rock for some time. In fact, it's now February 2023, and this episode was recorded during Thanksgiving in 2022. Between then and now, I haven't been very well, and I haven't been well enough even to edit this show or to get it published. And on top of that, I lost my voice for a short time, so I couldn't even record this introduction, which I'm now doing in late February. So some people might say, well, it's a good thing he lost his voice. I don't know about that, but moving along, as I said in this episode, we're going to be talking about the band Shelter. And to give background to that, we'll be discussing the straight edge movement and the Krishna Consciousness movement, Hare Krishna and Hinduism. Of course, since this is Philosopher Rock, we'll also offer our comparative religion view of the topics at hand. Now, we don't claim to be experts on these topics, and we offer here our opinions for your consideration and entertainment. So I really hope you're going to enjoy this one. Now, if you're seeing this on our YouTube channel, Philosopher Rock, please remember to like and subscribe. If not, and you want to hear more, just go to our website, likeflintradio.com. That's likeflintradio.com. If you want to contact us, just email us at philosopherrock@gmail.com. philosopherrock@gmail.com. Okay, let's go to Philosopher Rock and the band Shelter. Well, here we are again, Brian. It's good to have you back, have me back, because it's been a while since we've recorded anything.
Yes.
So just, if you wouldn't mind, just let us know how you're doing. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's, Thanksgiving Day here, which is a tradition in the United States. And so we're going to stuff ourselves with turkey and pie and probably some liquid libations. And it's going to be a good day. And, they haven't got the bird in the oven yet, but, they got it all prepped and ready. So how about you? How you going down there?
Well, doing all right. I think, I've had a few health issues that you and I have talked about a few times that have it's kept me from podcasting, it's just been pretty bad. But I've been looking forward to this one now. The big thing about this one, Brian, is that This is the first time you and I have ever discussed the music topic, let alone recorded on it, where I haven't known what you're talking about, right? We've had so much in common in our musical tastes, with, specific bands, specific albums, even right down to, specific tunes. But this whole genre here is new to me. So I am going to have to rely on you because, so we're going to be talking about the band Shelter. Now I'll tell you that they didn't penetrate down here at all that I know of. This whole genre, I'm barely aware of it. Now, if there's, Aussies and Kiwis listening now saying, you're an idiot, it was big here. Please forgive me. I just didn't pick up on it. It never got, I just don't know anything about it. So we're going to be talking about this band called Shelter. But for those of us who don't know, and I don't know a lot about this, I know a little bit, but I don't know a lot about this, Brian. What is the straight edge culture? If you could just give us a simple explanation of what it's about, what it is.
Yeah, so first of all, let me start off by saying that I'm approaching this with a bit of trepidation myself, just the fact that I don't want to come across as an expert in this area. And I also don't want to come across as being, trying to, come down on anybody or put myself above anybody in their belief system, because this is such a rich subject and such a very, broad topic that I can't really nail down every little aspect of this. And so like you, somebody might say, "Oh, you got it wrong, mate," and they probably wouldn't say that because they'd probably be American or
you got it wrong, buddy.
Yeah, buddy boy. But so just for our listeners, keep in mind that I'm no expert in this either. We're just taking a cursory look, not a deep dive. So the straight edge movement was something that started really, it finds its most discernible root is in the band Minor Threat. So in the early 80s, especially in the Washington, D.C. area, there was a sort of a revolt or a movement against the subculture. So it's a subculture where the punk rock scene was very, very liberal in its behavior as far as, use of drugs and alcohol and sort of sex outside of marriage kind of thing. A very, punk has that sort of wanton side to its behavior, people just kind of do what thou will kind of thing. And there was a group called Minor Threat that had the singer Ian MacKaye, who later went on to bands like Fugazi, and just he's been in a bunch of different stuff. But he wrote a song called Straight Edge. So it's very fast in the sense, that most of the punk music was kind of fast and aggressive. He had written a song called Straight Edge, and in the song he talks about how he doesn't drink or, smoke or whatever. So it was kind of it flew in the face of the punk rock movement of the time. And really kind of interestingly that, that punk rock, the initial punk rock phase or stage sort of died out almost by that time. There really wasn't a lot of bands that were doing the same sort of original punk rock style. So when MacKaye in Minor Threat, when they wrote that song and released it, it sort of kicked off a subculture of its own that was already kind of starting out west with bands like 7 Seconds, who were basically kind of saying, they were carving their own niche genre and sort of ideology of, hey, we're going to live clean, we're going to live positive, in scare quotes there, positive lifestyle. We don't fit in with the jocks, we don't fit in with the punks, we don't fit in with the metalheads. We're, the music was still aggressive and fast, but it was all about this unity kind of mindset where, they even formed things called youth crews. So it was like a big group of people who sort of had the same ideologies, were into the same kind of music. But then there was this idea of cross genre, because even though they drew from the punk rock music in the sense of the style of the music, fast and energetic, they still preached, or not preached might be a strong word, but they still sang about, being united. If we, like 7 Seconds had a song called if we can walk together, why can't we rock together? And it's like they were in a way they were separating themselves from the other cultures, but at the same time they were kind of saying, hey, can't we all just get along? Even though we don't share the same values necessarily, can we all just get along? And so honestly, that drew me in. That was a big selling point to me, because I'm sort of a mild-mannered type guy. I don't typically go out looking for trouble. But the music appealed to me as well, because it was very melodic, very upbeat, very fast, super catchy hooks, so it was kind of like everything that you liked in pop music, were the catchiness and the hooks and everything, but it had this, veneer of positivity, getting along with other people, and it celebrated drug-free lifestyle and abstinence from sex outside of marriage. And so there was a sort of, like I said, a veneer of upstanding righteousness type kind of, yeah.
Right. So was there so the music was still full on and aggressive. So were the gigs aggressive? Did they attract attention? Like, the straight punk bands used to attract a lot of attention from, the police, and they'd come and shut down a lot of gigs. Was it that did that sort of thing, or was it all sort of peace and love, or, do you know what I'm trying to ask you? Was it still aggro at the gigs? Was it a lot of aggro still?
Yeah, well, they're not so much. So here, the way, talking about how the police and things like that, how the culture around it viewed the straight edge movement was, first of all, it kind of lent itself to, so basically what I'm trying to say is, when they were doing these gigs, a lot of the underage kids would want to come to these shows. So, and the police didn't want the younger kids mixing in with the of age people who could drink alcohol, in bars and things like that. So a lot of the shows were done at venues that weren't necessarily venues, garages, basements. It was a very DIY roots kind of movement where it was in the underground in the literal sense, like this was happening. But at the same time, when bands wanted to play, went on tour and they wanted to play at a venue where so let's say it was a bar, the straight edge bands would say, we want the underage kids to be able to get in still. How can we get around the age, limit barrier? And what they did was, a lot of the clubs would say, well, okay, we'll mark a big X on the hands of the kids who are underage so that if they try to go to the bar and get a drink, the bartender can see clearly that they've been marked with an X, that they're underage, they're not allowed to be served alcohol. So, of course these kids didn't want to drink anyway, but what ended up happening was that became a sign of pride for them, kind of like they wore their, like, so to speak, scarlet letter, with pride, so that they would get these big X's on their hands. Well, the kids started showing up and just putting X's on their hands before they even got to the club. It became a mark. The X was became a mark of the straight edge movement. And so
a lot of them ended up getting tattoos, didn't they?
Tattoos, and they would, the X was a big thing that was, emblazoned upon all of the straight edge merchandise and album covers and things like that. There's a straight edge band called Bold that, even had a song where they were saying nailed to the X. So it was kind of like almost a shot at, Christianity, in the sense that it was like, this is our cross, we're nailed to this, lifestyle of asceticism to some degree. So yeah, that's kind of how it all got kicked off. There was an album by the Teen Idols, which was a band that McKay had been in as well, that featured the hand with the X on the backside of the hand, where then everybody started kind of doing it, just took off, So I was drawn into this, like I said, because I was exposed to, I was already a fan of punk, and like I said, I was raised in a Christian household, so the purity of it, the outward purity of it, and the kind of nice guy pitch that was happening with the bands appealed to me, because I felt like, okay, this isn't Black Sabbath where they're singing about the devil, even though I loved Black Sabbath. But I had my feet in two different camps, at least. If I had 3 feet or more than 2 feet, I'd say I had a foot in lots of different camps. I was a fan of all those different kinds of music. If it had aggression to it, I was into it, metal or punk. So then, because when the guys who became a part of that scene at the time, Ray Kappa was one of those guys who he befriended Kevin Seconds from the band 7 Seconds, and they kind of coordinated shows because 7 Seconds was from Reno, Nevada, and Ray Cappo, who was later to be in Shelter and also a string of other bands, they sort of coordinated shows because Cappo was on the East Coast and Kevin Seconds was on the West Coast. So they coordinated shows across the country, and that's how they would build, networks of fans and shows. And when Cappo reached, sort of started to get a name for himself and his band at the time, his biggest band was Youth of Today. And so what he did was he formed a record label. Kevin Seconds already had a record label in which he had released Cappo's first release with his band Youth of Today. And then Cappo went on to form his own record label called Revelation Records, and he put out an album by a band called Warzone from New York City. Now, the singer from Warzone, who's now deceased, his name was Rabies, Raybees, and he, I think he had said that he was straight edge, but he was also a skinhead, so that pulled in the element of the skinhead culture into straight edge. So you've got these overlapping magisterium, so to speak. You've got punk, skinhead, straight edge, and so there was a lot of elements in the mix. And so that was what got me interested in the skinhead culture, because Warzone and bands like Agnostic Front were all very, linked to this scene. So I became interested in the skinhead movement. So it was a very confusing time for a kid who was already confused, like most teenagers were, kind of like, where do I fit in here? I'm a metalhead, but I like straight edge bands. I like the skinhead bands. So I guess I'm a long haired, skinhead, which right there we got a contradiction.
Yeah. Yep.
Long haired skinhead, straight edge guy who loves to drink beer and listen to metal, So for me, it was kind of like I always straddled so many different genres, and I had friends who were in all of those groups, parts of those subcultures. So that brings me to the band Shelter. The way that we get to Shelter through all this is, like I said, Ray Cappo was very early in the movement of the straight edge music. Well, he was in a string of bands. I've collected most of their stuff over the years, and I like it all. He's very talented, and he always surrounds himself with a bunch of talented people too, which helps. But he, after finishing with Youth of Today, the band that was a really very driving force in the straight edge movement, after he had left Youth of Today, and they really didn't, for as powerful as a band as they were, they didn't put out a whole lot of releases, but the ones that they did were very influential, and that he drew in a bunch of bands that were influential at the time and influenced, like a host of the next generation or next wave of bands. But he pulled in bands like Judge from New York City, who were a straight edge band, and they were like real angry sounding and just a very powerful, strong band. And he pulled some bands from the West Coast all under his label, Revelation Records. So after that, he began to work with these musicians, and he kind of cycled in and out different musicians that he worked with over the years. Well, he finally, and you can see in the history of Youth of Today, as brief as it was, you could see his movement toward landing on a worldview. And what I mean by worldview is like a religion, or just, I guess I would say religion. Worldviews don't have to be religions, but they tend to be very close, and basically just an overarching belief system, I guess is what we'll call it. So you could see that Cappo who was the mouthpiece for, and these straight edgers who would listen to that will get that little joke there, mouthpiece. That was another straight edge band. But Capo was the mouthpiece for all the bands that he was in. So you could see that he was starting to get into Eastern mysticism, especially Hinduism, especially Krishna Consciousness. And so once Youth of Today broke up, Let me ask you this. Did he do a Beatles, and did he go to the subcontinent and find a guru and come back with the religion? Is that what happened here? Honestly, I don't know. Do you know? I don't know. I just thought, I wondered if that's what happened. Like a lot of the, musos from the 60s, that's what they did, didn't they? And the Beatles are the famous ones. They went to the subcontinent and found a guru, and then they came back with a new religion or worldview, whatever. I just wondered if that's what happened here. Now, I'm not really sure how he got into it, but I will tell you that there was the Hare Krishna movement had already been, because a lot of these names I butcher. So if I do say any of these names, just forgive me, because I don't mean to butcher these names, but the Krishna worldview had already taken hold in the United States on a small scale, because the Beatles, like you mentioned, they did, especially George Harrison was the one who sort of put the Krishna consciousness idea in his music. Was he's got the song My Sweet Lord, which is and he's chanting the song Hare Krishna, and so it was present in the bigger pop culture through people like the Beatles, but their main guru, or whatever you want to call him, I don't, that's probably a wrong term, but was Gaudiya Vaishnava. I don't know. It's like I said, I hate to butcher these names. Say that again, mate. I'm joking. I know Gaudiya Vaishnava. So he had formed. Easy for you to say. Yeah. He had. I'm sorry. I was waiting for you to do that. I just had that set up. But he had founded. It's called ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and that was founded in 1966. So this predated. This was already founded in New York City, which, like I said, New York City was where Capo and company were primarily located. Capo himself was from Connecticut, but he had been driving down to New York City to be a part of the hardcore and punk rock culture. So he was, by proximity, he was from New York. But so yeah, the Krishna consciousness had already taken hold in a smaller scale sense in America. Of course, it really finds its roots in Hinduism, which is, just like I said, we're given a cursory look at this. So basically, in Hinduism, you've got a pantheon of gods, and Hinduism is so broad, and there are so many tendrils of beliefs that grow out of Hinduism that I can't do it justice here. I mean, we could spend a lifetime doing studies on this. So, but basically, the Krishna consciousness movement boiled down is, in Hinduism, you can choose to worship, there's this multitude of gods. You can pick and choose kind of like your own personal deity that you're going to pay homage to or whatever, or worship. So in the Krishna consciousness, they say that Vishnu, the supreme god, that Krishna is one of the, it's like the 8th manifestation of Vishnu. So Krishna is a manifestation of Vishnu, and Krishna was supposed to be a person who lived on Earth, like in BC times. And so Krishna would have been considered divine, a divine manifestation on Earth of Vishnu. So the Hare Krishna they focus their worship on Krishna. So in a way, there's a lot of similarities to a lot of, other religions. So like, let's say, for example, in Catholicism, you have different saints or whatever. It would be almost like, this isn't an exact analog, but it would almost be like, if you were saying, the Saint John, I'm going to choose to worship Saint John because he is a manifestation of God himself or whatever. Of course, that no Catholic would do that. I would hope not. So that's kind of a short way of explaining what Krishna consciousness is. And you would see them portrayed in pop culture at the time. I remember seeing movies, like I think in the movie Airplane, they're at the airport and they're dancing and doing their tambourines, and they just kind of chant Krishna. I think the practice is that they are supposed to chant Hare Krishna like 1,000 times a day, and the reason for that is, at least in part, is it's a verbal. They say that the vibration of those words, chanting those words, it helps to, that particular vibration helps to not only focus you on God, but also to help you transcend, because their whole idea is the same as in Hinduism. They are trying to transcend this world. The physical world is Maya, which is bad. It's illusory. The true existence, the true self, is transcendent, is not physical, it's spiritual. And so they're trying to focus themselves on who they really are. So now we get a little bit into some of the lyrics of Shelter.
So yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. So do these themes come out, in the lyrics of this band Shelter? Is that where we're going here? Because I did a little bit of reading about this, and I don't know if I'm right here, but the idea of the term shelter, like the name of the band, is the idea is like a devotee seeking shelter from their guru or from Krishna or from God. So I'm thinking, okay, so if they're sort of naming themselves after that, and I'm trying to connect the dots here. So help me out here. So does it come out in the lyrics, these things of Krishna consciousness?
Yes, they definitely do. And see, this is another thing that helped to draw me in. So before I was what I would say, actually living out my Christian faith, I did a bit of like stumbling around, trying to, exploring different religions, studying different ideologies. I mean, I had already had a predisposition, having grown up in a Christian household. I kind of preferred the nonviolent, peaceful religions. I believed that there was a God. At the time, I hadn't discovered Christian apologetics to sort of hone down and, get answers for the questions that I had. So I was really studying. I mean, I was involved in the occult, which, the occult writ large could mean anything outside of Christianity. But what I mean by the occult is I was interested in witchcraft and even magic, black magic, that kind of thing. And even the satanic side of it had a certain appeal because of bands like Black Sabbath, even though they didn't really teach that. But I mean, the whole mystic side of the dark arts was appealing. But at the same time, I was conflicted because I knew that, certain things were right and wrong, and I didn't really want to. I also had a lot of negative repercussions from fooling around with that kind of stuff. So I already knew firsthand experience that the spiritual realm existed. Let's put it that way. And I knew that, it was better to do, certain good things. And so the outward appeal of the Eastern philosophies was strong, because I was like, well, it all seems all to be about positivity and, oneness and self, divinity. I was like, wow, this is very appealing. And, one of the things that I had a problem with was it seemed so muddied. It was like you couldn't really nail too much down. It was so transcendent and so, nebulous that it was kind of like, where do these things, how do they explain this? How do they explain that?
So they were thinking about positive things, but the sort of religious or spiritual side of things was hard to get a grasp on. What is this all about? Do you have an example?
Right. Well, so let's just say the idea of evil or sin, in a lot of the Eastern philosophies, evil or sin is just you being, I don't want to step on anybody's beliefs here, so I'm not saying that this is a be all end all answer, but that evil is like a lower vibration. You're kind of trafficking in a realm. When you do evil, when you do what's we would call sin, you're just trafficking or behaving at a base level. You haven't ascended to right thinking and right behavior, and that's where this whole idea of reincarnation starts to play into everything, because the Eastern philosophies are saying that the point of existence for us would be to escape this lower level of existence and reach moksha or nirvana, where so as you go through these cycles of birth and death and rebirth, that you are supposed to be learning. And one of the problems, like getting back to your question that I had, was, okay, so when you die, if you have built up negative karma during your lifetime, then that inveighs against you when you are reincarnated. So you may end up at a lower state. Like you're going to it's almost like a form of punishment. You go to you're reincarnated at this lower state, and you're supposed to learn from that. And I thought to myself, well, how in the world, if I'm reincarnated as, let's say, an animal, well, how in the world so first of all, they don't have any recollection they may not have any recollection of their prior life, so they don't understand why they've been reincarnated as an animal or some lower, or a person even, who's in, a tumultuous social state, like let's say they come back poor, or they come back, crippled or blind. It's like they don't necessarily know that they've landed there in their reincarnated state because of negative karma, especially if they're not born into the Eastern philosophies, if they're reborn as, you wouldn't have a clue. They're reborn, right.
You wouldn't know.
So if you're thinking of this thing as a ladder to be ascended, which might be a wrong analogy, but you kind of have no way of getting up the rungs, so to speak, because you don't necessarily know where you are or why you're there. So they're saying that through these different life iterations, your death and rebirth, you're supposed to be learning to ascend and transcend the world, this physical world, because the world is evil, broken, you're separated from the one true self, and then to find shelter, so to speak, to find shelter would be to come under the truth and dispel any false information, and to recognize who you are originally. And that's a line from a Shelter song, to realize who you are originally, and realize that you are divine, that you are one with the divine Godhead. And so their break, or the reason that there's dualism, is the fact that we have forgotten that we are divine, that we are one with the Godhead. And until we realize that, until we reach moksha, we will remain on the wheel of samsara, which is the death and rebirth cycle. So I don't know if that answers your question in the most roundabout way possible.
Well, so do these themes come out in the lyrics of Shelter's albums?
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
And this was one of the things that was appealing to me, was because it's all seems to be about selflessness. We've got, so like songs like The News. He's got a song in Shelter called The News. He says, turn down that noise, talking about like the television and everything that has to do with this world. And he's like, I want the news on me, which I was like, wow, that's really cool. He's like, he's exploring himself, rather than where the punk rock, lyrics might say in other songs, like the government's doing this, the government's doing that, we gotta fight. He's doing some introspection. He's going, hey, what about me? Who am I? I need to figure this out first. So in the song Shelter, he says, basically, we don't own anything here on earth. It's all on loan from God. And I'm like, wow, this is really cool stuff, because I agree with that, and if you don't dig into the philosophy behind it, if I didn't dig into the philosophy behind it, I could actually sing these lyrics with conviction, because I believe that, it's true that what we have, like property, family, it's all on loan. That's what he says. We're just loaned these things for this time. And so I was really into it, and I was like, yeah, but then the key element is, some of these key elements are left out. Like, from my perspective, sin. What do we do with sin? In their economy, in their belief, because sin is something we all have to face in this world. Brokenness, fallenness of man. Well, in their belief system, it's all just ignorance, that we don't realize. If we really realized who we were, we wouldn't do these type of things. Well, the Christian worldview says that we are fundamentally broken and flawed, and we're bent toward doing evil. Even if we may not do the most extreme evil, we still are bent. And we also are separate from God in the Christian worldview.
We would agree and say we all need a little bit of shining the light on ourselves, a bit of introspection to see where we are at. But I guess where we would diverge is, we believe in the supreme being, the one true God, and
yep.
we know that God is a just God. He has laws, right?
Right.
All of us have broken those laws, and I guess everyone listening to this right now would understand that we've all done dumb stuff, wrong stuff, and in the Bible it's called sin. But since He's a just God and He has these laws, and we've just said that we've all broken them, how do we deal with it? Well, He's provided a way for us to be reconciled to Him through His Son Jesus. That's the basic message of Christianity. We're all sinners. God is a just God, but He's made a way for us to be reconciled to Him through His Son. So that's where we would diverge, because we would say, well, we put our faith in Jesus and what He's done for us on the cross.
Right. And I'm glad that you brought that out and laid that out, because there's in the Hindu philosophy, God sort of just winks at sin. He's kind of like, you kids don't really get it. And they also teach that the self, so me, Brian, when I leave this earthly plane, that I choose to take on a body again, and that's part of the ignorance, so my soul transmigrates, And then when I return to the spiritual realm and I leave this body, they say that the part of the flaw is that we choose again to take a body rather than just stay with God and stay in the spiritual realm. And that's part of the ignorance, is taking a body again and returning to the wheel of samsara. And in Christian theology, God is completely and wholly H-O-L-Y and W-H-O-L-L-Y, wholly separate from creation. He's the only unique being. We are like him in some ways, but we are separate from him. And so is creation. It's not pantheism where everything is God, or he is everything, and, rocks and trees are all God. So it's different in that way.
And I guess the only thing we all have in common is that we're all created beings or objects or whatever, but it's not that we're all like connected to the universe. It's just that we all happen to be created beings or created objects. I was just thinking about that as you were saying that.
And you're right. And the other thing too is to keep in mind is that God, and this was where things started to really click for me with Christianity, because God, Yahweh, he is eternal. He's not created. And when you think about it logically, philosophically, you're like, well, there has to be something that's uncreated. We gotta start with something somewhere. Yeah. Because otherwise you just get infinite regress, like, well, who created this God? And then, and you get a lot of that kind of thing, the, infinite regress in Eastern philosophies where they're like, well, everything's an illusion. Well, but then who's having the illusion? Like you have to have an original, uncreated source that doesn't depend on, other things, that is creating all that we see, and us included. So,
because like I said, I didn't know a lot about these guys, but it's telling me that there's much that we may have in common, but we diverge at a crucial point. And you and I have sort of made both those points, but I wanted to ask you this. The point of view of Christianity is sort of, I've just outlined it. What are we giving up to be a believer in Jesus, right? To be a follower of Jesus and to believe in God. What are we giving up compared to what we get? What's the difference between, so these guys want to live a clean life, right? Just broadly speaking, let's just do a big broad brush here. No offense to anybody, but they want to live a clean life. For the most part, avoiding illegal drugs, avoiding alcohol. I'm guessing cigarettes, Brian, smoking is out as well.
Yep, gambling.
Right.
Also cigarettes, yep.
And we would say, for the most part, Christianity would agree with that. Sex, we would say sex outside of marriage, but I guess their point of view would be only to get involved in, air quotes, long-term relationships. Would that be right? Is that
yes.
kind of it? So there's a lot of similarities here, but we do diverge when it comes to Jesus, because we believe Jesus is the only way, right? That's what we believe. It comes down to that. No use beating around the bush. That's what we believe. Jesus is the only way to God, and he is the way, the truth, and the life. But what are we giving up to be believers compared to what we get? What are we missing out on?
So Jesus says count the cost in Scripture. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I think that honestly, we give up everything because we pull everything under the shelter of the blood of Christ that covers our sin. So we give everything over to him. He gets it all. He purchases us through his sacrifice. He lived the perfect life, sinless. So we exchange everything that we are. We exchange that for his righteousness and everything that he is. And that makes us holy in God's eyes. So it's not a works-based theology like every other theology, every other message other than Christianity says you have to work and do these certain things, like chant this name 1,000 times a day. And you said so much there that I wanted to speak on. I'll try to remember it all. But so let's take, for example, their asceticism, their denial or refusal to do certain things is because they want to have a clear head, a clear mind to be able to discern things properly. So whereas we might say, or at least I would say, that it's okay to have alcohol, just not in excess, because what we want to do is enjoy the things that God has created or allowed us to have, and we want to enjoy them within a certain type of order. I don't mean successive order. What I mean is just that there's a way that we ought to do things, and there's a way that there's a point at which you transgress that. Like you shouldn't have a whole bottle of Jack Daniels, but if you have a couple of drinks, it's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're enjoying it to the glory of God. And you're not just saying, I want to get drunk, or I want to use this thing to medicate, some other issue in my life. And so we don't use those things as an escape from our problems or whatever, or an escape from the truth of God. But they look at those particular things as a distraction, and that goes back to the Eastern philosophy of the idea of desire. So they want to basically nullify any other desire or distraction that pulls them away from worship. And that really is an admirable thing, because, our scripture says, pray without ceasing, things like that. But one of the other things that our scripture says, and the biblical scripture says, is when you're doing these things, have open dialogue. I'm paraphrasing, but the Bible tells us to have open dialogue with God. Just when you're praying, just speak to God like you would speak to other people. You don't sit and chant things over and over. And that was a thing that was more appealing to me about Christianity, was it was more intelligible. It wasn't just this thing where you chant a certain amount of things a certain time, at times of the day, or a certain amount of times. It was that God is a person, and he's willing to communicate with you, in the way that you normally dialogue. Now, the channel for that dialogue has been opened by the sacrifice that Christ made for us to reconcile us to God, because like you said, he is a perfectly just God, so he has to punish evil. Otherwise, he's not good. He's not just if he doesn't punish evil. Where in the Eastern philosophies, you kind of get a wink and a nod, like, you crazy kids don't know what's going on. You're making a hash of it, but kids will be kids, kind of thing. And I'm willing to overlook it. Just, I'm going to put you in a lower state the next time around. And then, you're supposed to learn from that. I mean, as a side note, thinking about any sort of generosity towards somebody, I've never heard anybody else say this, but I was thinking about it. Like, if you are, of the Eastern philosophy mindset, and you see somebody who's in a bad spot, it's almost like you wouldn't want to reach out to them or help them, because it's like you'd be corrupting their lesson that they're learning, like some form of charity might almost enable them to continue to be in a bad way, like being, it would disturb their karma, or it would disturb their lesson that they're learning through this lower state of being. But back to what you were saying about Jesus and what he says. So I had listened to, one of the things about Shelter is on some of their albums, they put the lectures at the end of which is really cool, because it helps you understand, kind of unpack their beliefs. And, so they mention a lot of good things. Again, it's like they've got a lot of elements of what I would consider the truth, but then they just get mixed with this, false belief and the bigger payoff. And, I'm getting around to answering the rest of your question.
Just before you do, I just wanted to tell you this. This discussion reminds me of that band, the British band called James. A couple of members, a couple of those guys, they were into the Eastern philosophy. And I remember reading that,
their guru had instructed them, to abstain from sex at certain times and to eat a certain diet and to live very clean. And it got in the way of their recording schedule. It got in the way of the recording schedule, their Eastern lifestyle. And I just remember reading that. And it just come to mind now when we were talking about this, that's another band that you could talk about with these sort of views, because the guru has definitely instructed them into living a clean life, including eating what he regarded as clean food. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I just wondered if you've heard of James, and you said you had.
Oh yeah, I've got at least one of their albums, and I do remember liking it a lot. I haven't listened to it in a while, but there are a lot of the Krishna bands that I like. There's 108, which was another hardcore band. Prema was another one that was good. Golden Avatar was like a 70s prog, late 70s, early 80s prog rock kind of Krishna band. And so yeah, I like a lot of the bands, and it's almost, I can almost have like that guilt-free listening, because it's like, now they're singing about good stuff, they're not singing. But so you had mentioned, we were talking about the differences between Krishna Consciousness and Christianity, and those lectures at the end of the CDs by the band, there was one particular speaker on there, and I looked him up and found a discussion that he had with a Christian person, and like a Christian philosopher. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, see, this all comes down to authority, who we're going to trust, and what we're going to trust them for as far as spirituality. And he had said, when he was asked about Jesus, what did he think about Jesus? And you could tell that he was skirting the issue somewhat, and it was like when he would be asked about questions about what Paul said and what the apostles had said after Christ, had died and resurrected, basically the beginning of Christianity, there in the New Testament. And he wanted to say basically that, the writers of the New Testament got it wrong. He said, I trust in the things that Jesus said about himself. And so basically he was discounting anything that anybody else said about Jesus, that he just was only going by what Jesus said about himself. And it's interesting because Jesus didn't write any of the New Testament, in the sense that Jesus, the man, the human, he didn't write any books. So everything that we have about what Jesus said about himself was from the hand of other people than Jesus. So this is one of those authority things I hear this bandied about a lot on, the internet, where people will say, well, I don't trust the Bible because it's been corrupted. And I mean, my question to them is always, okay, well, where is the corruption? Because we have documents to show that the only changes that have been done to the text over the past 2,000 years have been minor things that don't affect the actual message. I'm talking about substitutions of like small words like and or is or whatever. But the thing about it is this authority issue. People will say, oh, I don't believe the Bible, like it's been corrupted because people over time transmit things and it gets messed up, like the telephone game. And I think to myself, I'm like, well, they take other things on authority, like they take, they look in the phone book, they don't think, well, these numbers are wrong, these phone numbers are wrong because some human had, written them down. They obviously contain flaws, and maybe they do, but they still refer to encyclopedias. People use Wikipedia, all things that are written by.
Right. Well, another good example of that is, off the top of my head, is a comparison with Caesar's Gaelic Wars. So we know a lot about Caesar from his own writings. The earliest examples that we have are from 1000 AD. I think there's only maybe 10 examples extant. Yet we all go believe everything that we know about Julius Caesar, because we trust that only 1,000-year-old document. Yet if you look at just the New Testament, there's 23 or 24,000 examples. Some of them, say 8 or 900 years before the one I've just quoted, and they're tens of thousands times as many copies of that. But people say, well, you can't trust it because it's written by a man, but they will teach this history of Caesar's Gallic Wars in universities, and it will be taught as the gospel.
Right.
Yet the gospels themselves, tens of thousands of examples from the ancient world. So, I mean, that's just one I can just think of for the argument about, it's just written by a man, whatever. How do we know it hasn't been changed? Well, because within those 20 or 30 or 25, 23,000 from, just a few, from whole books to just small bits and pieces, the message remains the same. And the core facts remain the same.
Right.
That's just one thing I could think of. Sorry to interrupt you there, but I just thought,
No, that's okay. No, that's fine. So they're saying that, that Jesus, well, first of all, let's get back real quick on that, just to put a nail in the thing you were just saying is the idea that, I mean, their scriptures, how do they know that their scriptures aren't corrupt? Like they're written down by men, and, they go by the Vedas and certain ancient, writings or whatever from the far Near East. But, and so there is a lot of diversion and branches within their own, and disagreements within their own belief system. Same as we have like different denominations here.
We do too. But I was going to say, I think most of this point of view would probably be coming from atheists anyway.
Right.
People who have no God view of any type. I think that sort of thing that I was talking about, that would probably more than likely come from them. That's just what I think anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. But just the authority aspect, and finally getting around to answering your question, like if Hinduism proper or Krishna consciousness is correct, let's say they're correct, then really the worst thing that I have to fear is just not quite understanding the fact that I am divine, and that this whole birth and death rebirth thing is just unnecessary. And here I go again, like, reincarnating and not learning my lesson and not realizing that I am one with the supreme Godhead deity. If that's correct, then that's the worst that's going to happen for me. But if Christianity is correct, it says that not only is Hinduism false and Krishna consciousness is false, along with any other religion outside of Christian beliefs, it says that all those are wrong, and it says that if I don't repent and if I don't accept Jesus as a covering, a shelter, savior for my sins, then I will not be able to, I'll be separated from God for eternity when I die. No death, rebirth, not another chance around the wheel of, confusion. And it's just, that's where the thing that got me was, I was like, well, this is very rigid, very structured. It's very logical. It makes sense. And not only that, but my correspondence view of reality, it corresponds with what I see in myself. I see evil, within myself. I see a proclivity or a natural bent toward wanting to do things that are wrong.
Well, all of us are completely selfish. We're just all of us, every single person. Everyone listening to us right now, including me who's saying it, we're all just so completely selfish and wrapped up in ourselves. I always laugh when I hear someone say, well, I'm a good person, right? Well, none of us are any good. Think about it. Just think about how selfish you actually are. Because I can tell you, I'm very selfish, very, very selfish.
Yeah, me too.
And it's an awful thing. So
yeah, I would say that, the guy that I was talking about that I listened to the interview with, the Krishna guy, he is right in the sense that we need to let Jesus tell us who he is. It's not right for us to just take what he says and then make of it what we want. But the thing that's important about that is if we let Jesus speak and say and let us know who he is in his own words, then what he says, what we find out is that the Krishna consciousness movement is false. And when people want to try to blend Christianity into other worldviews and they want to mix Christianity with anything, the interesting thing about it is that Christianity says, no, you can't do that. But these other worldviews say that you can. And not only are those other worldviews, in my opinion, they have internal problems within themselves. They're conflicted within themselves, not just in denominational beliefs or whatever, or the particulars of the religion, but there's fundamental problems and logical problems within those worldviews that are incoherent. And one of the things is that they don't comport with Christianity. So when a true Krishna consciousness believer or a true Hindu would reject Christianity because it's very exclusive. And in some senses, Hinduism is exclusive as well, and they're incompatible. But people try to blend these things together, and it just doesn't work. And that was one of the things that drew me to Christianity, because I was like, this is very cut and dried. I feel like when God had humans write the Bible, he wrote it in such a way as to be exclusive, to cut the fat away and say, this is the narrow path. And that's what Jesus says. When he talks about the narrow path, he's talking about himself. The narrow path is, 2.5 feet wide, shoulder to shoulder, 6 foot tall. That's the way through, to salvation. And God he's just and he's perfect, and he doesn't wink at sin. And, we don't get, an infinite amount of chances. We've got this time here on earth to make the choice. If we roll the dice with Hinduism and say, well, I'll go with Krishna consciousness or whatever, and we're wrong, that has eternal ramifications, not just temporary ones, until we reincarnate. And that Christianity, if we are right about Christianity, not only do we lose all the bad stuff, but what we gain is eternal salvation, which is worth, when we count the cost, like Jesus said, it's worth the price of giving up all this stuff. So.
Yeah, so I think you make some very good points there. And just to finish, I think we would commend them for wanting to live a good, clean lifestyle, because that's what we want to do as well.
Right.
But there is a but here. But if you want to see God, you have to put your faith in Jesus. There's just no way around it. There's no point beating around the bush. If you want to make it to heaven and you want to see God, all those good things that you've ever heard about before, you've got to put your faith in Jesus Christ. There's just no other way I can put it.
Yeah, and the scripture even says that our good works are filthy rags to God, because we're not going to be able to stand before God in judgment and say, well, look, I did all these good things, you owe me salvation. Right. Because it says that the people who do that have only done that for their own selfish purposes. And when we accept Christ as our Savior, we are humbling ourselves and we're saying, hey, I can't do this. I need you to do this, God. And God says, I will do this for you. It's not a thing where we're going to be able to pridefully stand before God and say, well, look, I did this. I checked all the boxes. You got to let me in. He doesn't owe anybody salvation, but he's willing to grant it for those who are humble enough to ask and say, I need it. So.
Yeah. And that's the ultimate, I think, when we realize and come humbly and say, hey, listen, I am a very selfish person, and I do a lot of things wrong, and I need forgiveness, and I want to have a relationship with God, and we do that through His Son, Jesus Christ.
Yep.
So we just might leave it there, Brian. So thank you for your time, and until next time. I'm just going to say to you too, are you going to listen to some Shelter this weekend?
I've been listening to it for weeks. I think I'm going to pass. I'm going to go with something else. for next week.
Have you listened to what? Because have you got all of their albums? Have you?
Oh no, I actually stopped buying their albums in the mid '90s because I started to lose interest. They sort of changed directions a little bit musically, and so I kind of lost interest. But I like the older stuff. I've got the old stuff. I really love it. It's good music.
Right. All right. We'll leave it there. Thanks for your time, mate.
All right. God bless.
God bless.
Well, that's it for another episode of Philosopher Rock. I hope you really enjoyed that one. I know I did. I learnt some things there. And it was quite different to anything else I've done so far. Anyway, so if you want to contact us, you can write to us at philosopherrock@gmail.com. For more episodes, go to likeflintradio.com or our YouTube channel, Philosopher Rock, where there's more episodes and other shows as well, not just Philosopher Rock, are on both of those, the YouTube site and our website. Okay, so let's head off now with Acrolith and When the Claws Come Out.
For our struggle
See you next
is not
time.
against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness.
Claws come out!